Well, Melanie is with me now, and I'm also joined by the author, Dr. Joanna Williams, who's the education editor at Spiked Online. Welcome to both of you. Joanna, first of all, just watching that video briefly there and seeing what some women go through every day, particularly the more menacing moments as we saw there just at the end, is that misogynist behaviour in your opinion?
No. I think that video did the rounds on YouTube and went viral on social media. I think it was last year, but it's been very thoroughly debunked by a number of people who suggest that, well, questioned the areas of New York. Why were certain areas targeted? If you walk around with a camera, making eye contact with people, looking for a particular response, then you are likely to find it. I think the problem is nowadays we throw around statistics like 85% of women have experienced sexual harassment, but when sexual harassment is defined so broadly as to include winking and whistling, the real surprise is why so few women have experienced sexual harassment. If winking and whistling are sexual harassment, my surprise is that it's not 100% of women, but I don't think winking and whistling are sexual harassment, and I don't think this is something that really needs police time and attention to be spent on it.
Melanie, what do you say first of all to Joanna articulating this idea that it's just too broad a spectrum to include some of the things that she said, like winking?
Well, I tried to not trivialise this as just being a winking or a wolf whistling issue, and actually it's much broader, and it is about the continuous backdrop of harassment that women experience every single day. And it's, you know, it's going from very young girls in their school uniforms right through the spectrum, you know, up to adult women, and receiving unwanted attention that is intimidating, that is off-putting, and that puts us socially at a disadvantage, and we are targeted because of our sex. And I think that is when, and we've seen some success actually around the country. Nottinghamshire Police do define misogyny as a hate crime, and it has encouraged more women to come forward and report issues, and it's led to convictions of people who've been identified through that process, who've then gone on to commit some more serious crimes against women.
The thing is, Joanna, isn't this now, in 2018, an opportunity to set the reset button, to actually get the law to keep up with what we now deem acceptable standards of behaviour by men towards women?
I think we are pressing the reset button, but to me we're pressing it in a way which is entirely detrimental to women, because to me this proposed law is incredibly insulting to women. It suggests women are so fragile and vulnerable that they can't cope with walking down the street.
But why should they have to put up with endless wolf whistling or catcalling, or, you know, people shouting at you in the street, men saying, "Oi, darling"?
Because a lot of this is about human interaction, and women can cope with human interaction. Some women actually, I mean, bizarre though it may seem to people sitting here, some women don't find it unwanted. Some women do actually enjoy engaging with people and have no problem with it whatsoever. The danger is when we start talking about children in school uniform, girls in school uniform, we reduce all adult women to that status. I don't want police protecting me on the street from wolf whistles and catcalls. I'm more than capable of being able to protect myself. This is incredibly illiberal.
Right. In that sense, do we really need legislation to deal with this? Because there are laws already in place. We do have hate crime laws. We do have laws against harassment. So we are talking about what one might describe, and Joanna has said, as the more trivial end of what is harassment.
And I completely understand, you know, the side of the argument that Joanna is putting across. However, it is something that happens on such a ritualistic, regular basis. And when it comes to the other hate crimes that we already have, very often these can be kind of bisectional issues. So it will be people are being targeted because they are a Muslim woman or because they are a black woman. And, you know, actually to enforce it and make sure that it's properly dealt with, the police have said that they do not object to it. It doesn't take up any additional resources from elsewhere, that they are very happy to incorporate it into their work that they are already doing to better protect women.
I think you have to have led a very, very privileged life to think that this is the best use of police time. You've clearly never been mugged or burgled or been held at knife point.
That's very unfair to say that, and I'm not assuming that at all. And this is the problem, I suppose, with the line of the debate that has, you know, largely been taken taken out of context. But this is about fostering a real change in our culture. And there's been the chair of the sex discrimination review that the Forces Society undertook said that the laws do set our cultural norms and our behaviours.
But isn't that the point?
But exactly, it is the point, and it's an incredibly illiberal change, which is about policing personal behaviour, monitoring interactions between people.
I really don't understand
want
why
to
men
live in a world.
Well,
I don't think it's just men. I think actually lots of women would object to this law too.
Well, would you object to a law like this, Miata?
Well, so it's clearly bad behaviour, and I disagree insofar as, it's sexist and it shouldn't be tolerated. And there's a spectrum, and I think you do have to be proportionate. And, some of the things that we see, men taking pictures of women up their skirt and stuff absolutely should be banned. Catcalling, wolf whistling, I think we do need, within the bounds of the existing law actually, to treat them firmly and more strongly than we are at the moment. But I think there's a kind of cultural norm. I think if you say it's okay, people will continue doing it. But actually, if more people are saying this is absolutely disgraceful, it is unacceptable, you cannot behave in that way, that in itself starts to shift the cultural norm.
But what does it say, as Joanna said earlier, that actually you're going to, in some way, change interaction between men and women, that is how relationships, not with wolf whistling, catcalling, but if you interfere at a sort of legal level to that extent, it will make it difficult for normal human relations to continue.
It really doesn't, though, does it? I mean, to treat somebody entirely with dignity and respect in a way that you would treat for a man to treat another man, to do that to a woman, I don't think it redefines our relationships at all. And the idea that men are completely unable to cope with doing it at that level is insulting to them.
The problem is everybody has a different idea of what dignity and respect mean. I mean, I speak to women who will say to me in private, I wouldn't want this to be known publicly, but if someone wolf whistles at me, it puts a spring in my step and a smile on my face.
But should that be the reason and the basis for actually not changing a law where more women may feel intimidated by it?
So there's an article out of Vox.com. I asked my wife to read it because I wanted to see if she had the same reaction to it that I did. And it's kind of a fascinating article because the article is about sexual assault within marriage. Now, sexual assault can happen within marriage. We're in a Me Too moment. Obviously, it's International Women's Day. And so, it's very important to talk about proper behavior toward women. It's important to talk about what women should expect from men. It is important to talk about how men should behave toward women. All that's very important. One thing that I'm seeing in the feminist movement, it's been happening for a long time, is conflation of a lot of terminology that is actually dangerous to relationships and dangerous to marriage. There's an article today about sexual assault within marriage by Anonymous over at Vox.com. Anonymous happens to be a feminist professor, shockingly, and this article is about how she says she was sexually assaulted within marriage. Now, sexual assault can occur within marriage. Obviously, it can occur outside of marriage as well. Sexual assault is just a woman says no and a man says, I'm doing it anyway, right? That's sexual assault. Right? A woman refuses consent and a man disobeys that and then does the most evil act a human being can do outside of murder, which is that he takes advantage of a woman against her will. Right? That is, in my view, should be punishable by castration or death. I mean, that's how seriously I take sexual assault. But one thing that the left has done is they have watered down consent. So we saw this with the Aziz Ansari story, where a woman accused Aziz Ansari of violating her consent when she did not, in fact, say no to him at any point. When she did say no, he stopped. It was just him being persistent. There was really no evidence that he raped her or sexually assaulted her in any way. She got naked in his apartment. They performed sex acts on each other. That whole story was ridiculous. Vox.com has another story that Ezra Klein is calling deeply important. And so I think it's important to recognize a couple of things. Within marriage, number one, as a married man and as a man and as somebody who reads social science studies and as someone who believes in evolutionary biology, men want sex more than women do. Or at least they want sex on a more regular basis than women do. Okay, every social science study ever done shows this. Men, on average, want sex more often than women do. The great feminist lie that women want sex in the same way that men want sex is just absurd. It's crap. It's not true. Men are more aggressive about sex. Men want sex more often. Men want sex with more different partners. Okay, all of these things are supported by a vast bevy of social science statistics. What that means is that within marriage, there is often an imbalance. Men want sex more often than their wives do. And so a question arises. What happens if a woman does not really want to have sex, but the guy wants to have sex? So the way traditionally women have treated sex within marriage is that there's a difference between I actively don't want to have sex with my husband and I'm not super into it, but I'll go ahead with it anyway. okay, I'm not super into it, but I'll go ahead with it anyway because I love my husband, is a pretty common thing within marriage. In fact, it's a very common thing within marriage. And I think it's a good thing within marriage. I don't think it's an active, I think the woman is not doing something wrong. I think she's doing something healthy and right for the relationship. Because when it comes to, that's not saying that a woman should have sex if she really doesn't want to, if she thinks her husband's a bore and disgusting person. If that's the case, divorce him. Or if the woman's feeling sick or she's not up to it. Like, a woman should never have sex if she doesn't want to have sex in the most egregious possible terms. But there are lots of times when women go along with a man. Man says, I would like to have sex with you. And the woman's like, well, not super into it. The guy says, please. And the woman says, okay. Right? This is a thing that happens routinely within marriage. It happens within every marriage. And it is healthy for marriage because one of the things about doing things for people you love is that you're constantly doing things where you are ambivalent about them, but you do them for the sake of the person that you love. Now, what's weird is that the feminist left treats it as though the only form of sex that can ever be had is the most passionate, the most interested form of sex. That women have to be, just really super into it in order for them to consent in the first place, which seems to violate the women's principles of consent. Like, there are lots of women who are willing to have sex with their husbands just because they think that it's a sign of love to their husbands, even if they're not physically in the mood. Right? That happens all the time. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think it's a very healthy thing. I think it's setting an expectation up for women that can't be fulfilled within a relationship if they think that a man is going to be happy with his wife only having sex with him only at the times when she is most enthusiastic about it. Because again, just biologically speaking, women are not going to be enthusiastic about sex nearly as much as men are. Relationships are about people doing things that they are ambivalent about or even maybe don't want to do all that much because they love their partner. Again, this is not to say that men should be able to violate the consent of their wives. Of course not. That's rape. But it is to say that there are lots of situations in which women consent, aren't super enthusiastic, and consent anyway. We have this in everyday life with a variety of issues. And it's not just, and it's true of sex as well. The reason I say this is because this article from Vox.com blurs this line. They say that anytime a man says to his wife, can we have sex? And she says, I'm not super into it, but okay, that he's now raping her. This is a problem, okay? This undermines the nature of relationships. It creates false expectations for women on how sex is supposed to go within relationships. It creates false expectations for men on how sex is supposed to go within marriage. So here's what this anonymous person writes, who is, of course, a feminist. She says, a feminist professor. She says, 8 years into our marriage, sitting in a therapist's office with my husband, I mustered all my courage and said my deepest, darkest truth. When we have sex, I feel like I'm being violated. The unwanted sex at times made me sick. Once I had to run straight from the bed to the bathroom where I retched into the toilet. I spared him and the therapist that detail. Now, she doesn't say that she said no and then he raped her anywhere in this article. She just says that she didn't want the sex. She's apparently said yes or consented to it, and then she went and retched, which is I wonder why these people were married. There's part of the story we are not hearing here. That's not a normal thing. You have sex with your husband in a consensual level and then you go vomit. I'm going to go with they've got some other problems. She says, my husband shrugged and staring ahead with more indifference than disdain replied, she's always so melodramatic. His response didn't surprise me. It was his standard reaction to my complaints about the sad state of our marriage, his way of training me to see my needs, emotional connection and communication as excessive, and his primarily sex as entirely reasonable. So, quick note here. Men see sex as a substitute for intimacy. Women see intimacy as a reason for sex. Okay, so if a woman won't have sex with her husband, the man sees that as a rejection of him. Okay, the man sees it as a rejection of love for him. If a woman doesn't feel emotional intimacy and she feels like she is only being used for sex, then she feels like she is being used. So men and women are almost coming at sex from polar opposite directions. Okay, but the way that they meet is inside a committed relationship when intimacy and sex are completely overlapped. One of the things the feminist movement has done, I think has been really egregious, is they've separated off intimacy and sex. They've said sex is a bodily function and intimacy is an emotional function. And that means that you can separate these two things off. They did this so that they could separate commitment from sex. They did this so they could say that marriage had nothing to do with sex. They did this so they could say single people sleeping around, totally fine, totally praiseworthy, totally healthy, no bad ramifications. All you have to do is just see sex as pooping, and it's the same thing, right? Sex is eating. It's just another bodily function you engage in. Why should there be any emotional connection? But then when it comes to how actual human beings behave, intimacy is inherently connected to sex. And that's true for men as well. Okay, if a woman who is married to a man will not have sex with him under any circumstances, he is going to feel slightly peeved. He is going to feel as though the woman doesn't love him. And I don't think that's completely unjustified. Anyway, this woman continues, I had dragged us to couples counseling because I could no longer live in the vacuum left behind after the emotional intimacy had seeped out of our marriage. My husband hadn't noticed the loss, proclaiming himself happy. At home, so he sounds like an insane person, by the way, to be happy in this relationship. At home, having tried without success, the therapist prescribed exercises for restoring emotional connection, check-ins about feelings, non-sexual touch. My husband lobbied for his own solution. The thing you need is really complicated and difficult, and it's not something I can do. But the thing I need is easy and quick. Why can't you just give me the thing I need? I acquiesced. Okay, that's called consent. Okay, so she's stupid, first of all. She sounds like a person who at least is making bad decisions. Right? If your husband says to you, I can't give you anything that satisfies you emotionally, just give me the sex, and you go along with that, you're making a mistake in your relationship. She says, at the time, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt inevitable. I lived every evening dreading the signals of my husband's desire. I bargained my way out of sex as often as I could. I gloried in being sick enough to have the right to refuse. On the nights when I couldn't get out of it, we used a method I taught myself to tolerate and that he astoundingly tolerated as well. I read a book to distract myself for as long as I could while he did the thing he needed to do. I did not let him kiss me for the last several years of our marriage. That was the rule. You can bleep me, but you can't kiss me, and I don't have to pretend to like it. That satisfied him. Okay, so first of all, he sounds like a real messed up dude. Okay, if that satisfies any guy, if a guy feels satisfied by that sort of level of sexual connection with his intimate partner, then that person is screwed up. There are a lot of deeper issues in this marriage, but the problem I have with this article is the conflation of what seems to be, like, what she's talking about is a failed marriage, a real failed marriage where she hates her husband and he doesn't care about her. Okay, but what she's conflating that with is every woman who's ever said yes to sex with her husband when she wasn't like super into it. And she's conflating that with sexual assault.